go.
It comes and goes. We're out here chasing a feeling.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. This is your host, Becky McNattin, along with host Tara Martini. We're glad to have you listening as we live and share stories of mental health. And today, we're joined by Macey Christian, a fellow therapist who focuses on maternal mental health. Macey has a big passion and a gift for walking alongside women as they navigate motherhood and all that comes with becoming a parent. We're happy to have you, Macey. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I have been really looking forward to having you on the show today because we are exploring such an important topic. We're focusing on mental health for women. Specifically, we're talking about women during the experience of pregnancy and post-pregnancy. And in the clinical world, we call this maternal mental health. The Maternal Mental Health Alliance in the United States shares that 1 in every 5 mothers experiences a mental health condition.
That's a crazy statistic.
1 in every 5, yeah. And 75% of women, that's 75%, everyone, remain untreated. This increases long-term impacts on mothers, their children, and families. This is really significant.
Well, it's a tragedy, the idea that 75% are going untreated.
Yes. And not only is it not discussed widely, the very nature of maternal mental health is complex because having a baby comes with so many physiological, social, and psychological changes. Of course, there's this biological component with the hormones that are happening and changing rapidly. There are huge changes in roles and relationships. And having a baby often also comes with stressful life circumstances, like maybe moving, financial pressures, and even professional or job transitions. So, Macey, what would you say to all of this?
Yes. Yep. All of that sounds about
Show
right.
done.
Yes. You said it all. No. Yeah, it's a conversation we're not having enough. I think it's so often brushed under the rug as, yep, this is what it's supposed to be. Of course it's a big deal. ... And then that's it. You're just kind of supposed to deal with it.
That's a good point.
We're talking about it more and more, which I think is awesome. And we're trying to build villages and just have more conversations about what people need and what we're looking for to know what people might need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, when we think about 1 in 5, 20% of women who are pregnant, post-pregnancy, are experiencing a mental health condition. And this is something that you have a huge passion about. Where did that passion start from?
So let's see, it's 2025. So in 2019, I was working as a therapist and I was really doing more general work.
Okay.
And I met a client, and obviously for anonymity purposes, they were just dealing with something that I didn't have any training on. But our rapport and our relationship was so good. So I was honest with them about my lack of competence in
Which is so
perinatal.
important.
Yeah. And they were like, I really don't care. How about you just seek consultation while we continue to work together?
Wow.
And as soon as I started talking about perinatal stuff, and I didn't have any kids at the time, I was single. And I just, as soon as I got into the world, I just was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I'm getting goosebumps just
That's
thinking about it.
incredible.
Yeah. And I've never looked back. I just totally jumped in with it. And got to continue to work with that person for a long time too.
Does that person know that they are the inspiration behind
A little
your
bit.
journey?
It's like,
incredible.
it's a lot to, seemingly put on them. And yet, like, yeah, it was them.
Yeah, you could remember the exact moment
Oh, yeah, for
of,
sure.
of passion
Yeah.
and seed planting on something that has become so much of what you do. And when we talk about 75% remain untreated.
Yeah.
So we need to have the conversation, and we need to help people understand what this is, how to think about it, how to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Super great discussion, and so much for us to explore in this show today. Right now, we're going to take a short commercial break, but stay tuned as we discuss motherhood and mental health more. Thank you for tuning in to Feels Out Loud, everyone. We will be right back.
Express yourself. You don't know.
Welcome back to Feels Out Loud, brought to you by Becoming Together Therapy and Wellness. I am Tara Martini along with Becky McNattin. So let's head right back to our discussion about maternal mental health. We have so many questions to ask you today. But before we get started, tell us just a little bit about you as a human.
Yeah. So, of course, we always think about, who we are in the context of work. So I'll just
Yes.
get that out of the
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
I am a therapist, obviously specializing in perinatal mental health, which I'll talk about that terminology more
Perfect.
later.
Mhm.
But that's kind of my passion. It wasn't in the beginning. I did like county work and state case management work for many years, 7 years full time and then 3 years part time. And then once I realized I was going to, maybe move toward a marriage, I realized I needed just a little bit more predictability and stability. So therapy, while unpredictable within the context of your day, I know when I'm going to go home. I know,
That's a really good
that
point.
I'm going to be
Yeah.
home for supper.
It's what you
so.
needed.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's kind of the work piece. And then I have a husband, 2 young children, a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old. So perinatal feels very relevant for me on a personal level these days. And then 2 rescue dogs who were our original babies that we had. They are both 8. So
Wow.
So you're like living
Mhm.
maternal mental health as well.
Yep. Yeah, for
sure. And can speak to that professionally and personally.
yes.
Well, and that piece of how incredible, because you stated in the last segment that you started before you were single and all those things, how drastically you could view that concept then once you became you were pregnant, you became a new mom, the whole postpartum thing. I mean, I'm sure it just unraveled so many thoughts and different things that
It was a good transformation, and there was also some guilt there of like, did I validate enough? Did I support enough? Because I
Oh,
didn't really
right.
truly know.
Well, right.
And yet I kind of had to work through that and kind of figure out, like, you do the best you can. But I do think that being a perinatal therapist before I had kids was nice because I was able to just immerse totally in their experience, and I wasn't caught up in any of my
It's a great
own,
point.
right? And so I do notice that difference now.
That makes total sense.
And that was kind of a cool, like, just clean slate
Yep.
type of look at it.
So Macey, maternal mental health conditions are noted as one of the most common complications of pregnancy and childbirth, affecting around 800,000 families just in the United States every single year. Tell us a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah. So you'll hear me use the term perinatal. The reason I use that term is simply because it's all encompassing. Because when we think of the word maternal mental health, there's a lot of people that are going to resonate with that. But what about the people who are in the throes of infertility or working toward adoption and maybe don't yet identify as part of the maternal world?
Got it.
Folks who've experienced losses. And so, I think out of habit, I just revert to that. But so it's just a little bit of everything. Because we do know that, so when it comes to perinatal mental health, you can get what we know as postpartum depression anytime during infertility, like anytime during the process. And the term postpartum is hard because it's like, after delivery. And it's like,
well, it's what it literally means.
Yeah, exactly. And so the reason I revert to that word perinatal is because people can come in at 12 weeks pregnant and be experiencing what really is postpartum depression. It's just not post-delivery, if that makes sense.
So you use the word perinatal as a way to encompass this idea of the entirety of that spectrum.
A little bit of everything. But most of, I think, what I'll be talking about probably for the rest of the segment will be really more focused on kind of the pregnancy and postpartum experience.
But like you said, it could include
Mhm.
people dealing with infertility issues or going through the adoption process. And so perinatal, like an exact definition, or if you had to say, in a sentence or two, if someone said, what is perinatal
Yeah.
care?
Anything from when you start trying to conceive,
Okay.
or starting the process of adoption, or starting the process of expanding your family in whatever way that looks like, all the way through a year postpartum and beyond,
Hmm.
if the circumstances that are contributing to the postpartum are not resolved or are not
Okay.
kind of looked at.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So it's for a lot of different people
So, mhm.
And
in
we
different
mentioned in
stages.
the last segment these biological, psychological, social changes for new mothers. Walk us through those, each of those, and the complexity of the experience of perinatal mental health, then,
Yeah,
what those challenges are.
absolutely. So lots of so I guess I'll kind of separate them out in the categories you were talking about. So the biological piece, there's those hormonal shifts, which those come up. Will we talk about the baby blues at all?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay. So that'll come up in the baby blues conversation. Huge biological shifts, or excuse me, huge hormonal shifts with our estrogen and progesterone levels as we kind of get rid of what we don't need after we have birth or after we give birth. Then we've got the oxytocin that comes from the bonding experience, the feeding experience. Maybe you're seeing your partner hold your baby for the first time. There's just a roller coaster of things happening. Physical recovery from birth, complications. We can have a prolapse. Maybe we had a C-section. Maybe we had tearing, just all sorts of complicating factors. So the physical recovery, body changes, body image changes.
Yeah.
Our
Whole
body
other-
are doing our body's doing things. And what's interesting? I thought, of course, everybody told me that when I had my second child that it was going to be totally different. I didn't believe them. I was like, I've done this before.
You're an expert, girl. You've
my
done it once.
gosh, Yes. It is so different, even what your body does, even when it's
Mhm.
supposed to be predictable. None of my hair fell out postpartum with my first child. I thought and then
Yeah.
the second child, it's like, oh, that's what this feels like.
Yes.
All of my
Mm.
hair. So
Mhm.
just things like that. There are so much happening.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So then not that that's everything, but those are some of the big things that come to mind. Psychological changes, identity. Yes, you are a new parent. Maybe that's what you've been wanting for a long time. That doesn't mean that we are not going to maybe experience grief over our old life,
Right.
or over
What shifted?
yeah,
And that can be scary.
yes. And not feeling like you can talk about it because for fear of sounding ungrateful. You wanted
It's a
this
great
baby.
point.
It's this amazing change. And yet, it's not always going to be all unicorns and rainbows. So there's that psychological piece. I'm supposed to be grateful, and this is really hard.
Right.
I'm not
Both can
cherishing
exist
every
Well said.
together,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But it is interesting because all those things make us think about how we really have been inundated with a message of it's so joyful, be
Yeah.
grateful,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then there's that shame along with it and guilt. Well, but what if I also struggle?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you had mentioned baby blues.
Mhm.
So around 85% of women experience the mood changes following the birth of a child. What is the difference, can you explain, between this baby blues concept, as society calls it, or anxiety or depressive disorders?
Yeah. So to differentiate the two, we're going to look at severity, frequency, or not frequency, like severity, duration, kind of how long it's lasting,
Yep.
and then also like when it starts.
Mm.
Yep.
So the baby blues are going to be a little bit more predictable in that way, where we're going to have that big hormone drop for the first couple weeks,
Okay.
say maybe around 10 to 14 days. Some people, yes, the lucky few might really not have a lot of symptoms of that. They might, and it can look like pure joy. That's still hormonal changes. That's still an experience. But others will experience just lots of crying. Why did I do this? Why, oh my gosh, this is so hard. But recognizing that it is a hormonal experience that does not necessarily need treatment and should resolve in those first 10 to 14 days.
Okay.
So I will often tell my people, like, absolutely, we can meet for therapy during that 10 to 14 days, but we're not going to freak out or think, we're not going to assume that we're going to have.
We're not going to diagnose or, yes.
We're just going to be in that. So I also like to prepare partners too, of like, she might look at you and be crying because she's thirsty while holding her water bottle that's full. That might happen. And let's just support her. Let's not shower her with logic. Let's just shower her with love. Or she might be, oh my gosh, I remember was watching Encanto and I was just bawling because I'm like, this soundtrack is so underrated. Like, how do people not understand? And I was like, oh, there's some emotions going on.
There's maybe a little
That's
emotion.
not something I would normally cry about.
Yeah.
But it was like, yeah, there's these big hormonal changes. And so we should see that resolve. It's not necessarily an emergency. It doesn't mean people don't need support, but it's different. With postpartum depression, you're going to see either like the prolonging of those symptoms, or you're going to see like a resolution in those symptoms and then maybe onset later. So often if somebody has like a birth trauma or like perinatal PTSD, we might not see the onset of that until maybe 4 to 6 months after baby comes home.
Really?
So it won't necessarily, so that's why that onset is important. Postpartum depression is not going to start the day that you get home. That would be what we would look at more as the baby blues.
But I think too, that's such a misconception, right? Of you think postpartum, like the minute I give birth, oh wait, I've been fine for the last 4 to 6 weeks. What is this new thing, right? There's so many myths out there about what this is. So it's so like, when you just said the whole like 10 to 12 days after with the hormone shift, I've had 2 children. I've never heard of that. Like, there's so much information
part of what we're
that
not talking about.
Right, which is such a sad reality.
Yeah, when Macey highlights, it's not a discussion that we're having, which is part of likely the 75% untreated. They don't even know.
No, because we're never educated on those basic things.
Yeah. One of the things that you've mentioned to me before, Macey, and that I've read just a little bit from being in the clinical world, that 33% of women develop something during pregnancy, anxiety or depression. 27% of women enter pregnancy with a mental health challenge. 40% of symptoms develop post delivery. So you're talking, when you talk about onset, there's complexity here because some people have had anxiety and depression before they got pregnant, before they had a child, or have a familial predisposition to something. But when we talk about that 75% untreated, what you've mentioned to me and what I saw in literature is that it really can last for years if gone untreated. So how do you see the untreatedness of perinatal mental health impacting clients when you meet them?
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. I can very quickly during an assessment, if somebody's got a 3-year-old or even a 7-year-old, and I'm talking to them and I start to learn more about their background and story, I can sometimes very quickly be like, did you have postpartum? Yeah, I never got treated. And it's just kind of like, bingo, like there it is. And it's, whether it's lack of support, stigma, well, I'm sure we'll talk about the barriers at some point, but for whatever reason, if it was untreated, unfortunately, yeah, those symptoms can linger and they can look like chronic depression and they can look like ongoing anxieties, because the reality is if we're experiencing something like perinatal anxiety, let's say it's around our child's development, that might not just resolve itself. If we're worried about, let's say, neck strength in the beginning, are we going to be worried about, tying shoes at kindergarten? It's just those things can kind of evolve because there's always going to be something to be anxious about or to feed that anxiety, I should say.
Makes total sense.
Well, and so important to bring up, like you said, it can last years, right? I think people think postpartum depression is when they're a newborn, right? A baby. And like you're saying, those symptoms can show up when that child is 3 or 7. It doesn't look like we think it looks.
Good point.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago birth trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a term some people don't even know what that is. So talk about that a little bit more. And how do you see birth trauma impacting mental health?
This is like so beyond just perinatal mental health, this is like my biggest passion ever. So stop me when you need to.
No, girl, you just go.
Because it's like, I'm the person who like, if it was socially acceptable, I would go up to random people and ask them their birth stories. And it's just so, I want to know everybody's experiences, the good, the difficult, all of it. But I think there's I don't know what the percentage is that they're saying of people who actually get perinatal PTSD, but it seems like a really low percentage. It was like, I don't know if it was like 3 or 3%. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, anecdotally, I feel like I see a lot higher than that.
Okay. It's not accurate.
Right. And granted, I know I'm seeing people who've sought out help. And so there's certainly a population who are not, but man, because just like with any trauma, it really doesn't matter what the event is. It just matters how your nervous system and your brain interprets it.
Yes.
And so with birth trauma, you can have what one might say a pretty textbook experience. Yeah, that's all the things that was supposed to happen. And you had a healthy baby, and that's great. And yet something might have happened in the process that our nervous system or our brain interpreted as scary or a threat or dangerous. And that can cause some of those symptoms. And so, and I can often kind of find that in having people walk through some of those things of like, but they don't necessarily go to the idea right away of like, yeah, my birth was really traumatic,
Right.
because it might not be what they think trauma should look like that.
I know this is putting you on the spot big time, but could you think of a couple examples, like where you said it doesn't have to be a massive trauma, right? Where there's what we would think of, right?
Yeah.
Can you give a couple examples of just like when you're like, well, I had a normal labor and delivery and
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking of like somebody who was just having a repeat C-section. They knew exactly what to do. They knew exactly what to expect. It was planned. It was exactly what they wanted to happen and medically what needed to happen. And they were getting ready to go in, and all of a sudden a code was called somewhere else in the hospital. So a few people from that room left kind of unexpectedly. And, the other people were like, all right, let's go. And I think and she was still completely fine, again, on paper, but nobody really stopped to explain to her, like, hey, we've still got everybody that we need, but some people had to run to a code. All she saw was like a third of the people in the room rushing out
and being left.
and then being left, and nobody's saying like, you're still good. And so then you go into that. And so it really, again, nothing bad happened. She had exactly the experience she was supposed to. But right before she went in for the C-section, her nervous system was like, what is going on? So she benefited greatly from doing some trauma work around that and figuring out like, oh, that's what that was, That's kind of an example I can think
that's a
of.
great example, and one that she probably didn't even think of, right? Wow. It's incredible. So for listeners out there who are mothers or know a mother who is struggling, what would you say to them? And I know that's a huge question, but
yes, and gosh, we could go any way with this. Of course, I'll start with the cliches. Help is there. Help is there if you need it. But really, I think that's important, because if you're talking about because we're talking about 75% of women going untreated, we're missing something to be able to tell them and to spread the word. So help is there. And I'm, if it makes sense now or later, I'm happy to share where that help might be, how we might get that. But also, like, you're not alone. I've worked in an intensive outpatient postpartum program. I've seen not just the power of the therapist and the client dynamic, but I've seen the power of group and just sitting with people who have had similar experiences with. Even if the only thing you have in common is that you're also a new mom, just sitting and being with people who've had similar, difficult experiences, so much power in that. And so sometimes it is just knowing some of these numbers of like, oh my goodness, I thought I was the only one. So that can be helpful to hear. And that you're a good parent, because so often people struggling with postpartum depression are feeling like, they're a bad parent or I'm a bad mom. And I can't believe how many times I hear that. And I think of like the people who are worried about being a bad mom
Are the good
not,
yes,
like that
yes.
is such a hard thing to hear, because you
Yep.
are a good parent and like you do care. So
Mhm.
that would be something, and just really encouraging people to seek help.
Yeah, you're saying if you're out there and you're listening, and when you sit with yourself, you say, I'm struggling. I hear you saying, Macey, it's there's compassion for you. We care about you. There are options. You do not have to struggle alone.
Yeah. Postpartum depression is 100% treatable. It's 100% treatable.
Wow.
That's yes, that's a really powerful statement. You mentioned a quote, and I like something that people might say, and I think there are people who say things like, I don't feel like I'm a good parent. You just mentioned this. I don't feel like a good parent at all, or having a baby was a mistake. You mentioned that in the first, these sort of that we judge ourselves about. I think also we talk about postpartum depression. We don't necessarily talk about postpartum anxiety. So some anxiety is so high, I can't ever calm down. And how would you respond to these kinds of statements, Macey?
Yeah. So, of course, I would start with that validation piece of like, yeah, this is a really hard time. Of course this is hard. And also, what would we say to a child if they were experiencing an emotion? We would say, I believe you. We all as humans just want to be believed. We just want to be heard. And so I would hope that it would be the same with an adult, like we just the power of like, yeah, absolutely. And I think being able to then, like, once we can make sure we've got that validation and that support, or that we're able to give it, we can also look at where are the facts and where are the feelings, because I can feel like a bad mom. But and I'll give you an example. So my 2.5-year-old was having like a complete meltdown, and it was one that it was not, we weren't going to self-soothe our way out of it. She really just wanted to be held. And I knew that's exactly what she wanted. And meanwhile, 9-month-old, learning to crawl, pulling everybody's hair, climbing all over us. It was only escalating the meltdown. And so I turned on Miss Rachel for my 9-month-old.
Good old Miss Rachel.
Yep. Third parent here.
Yeah.
And then I just held my 2.5-year-old, and I kid you not, I said to myself, oh my gosh, what kind of parent turns on Ms. Rachel for their 9-month-old? Like,
Most parents.
what am I doing?
Most parents.
Right?
Yep.
And
And
then
it's
I was
okay
like,
to do it.
Great
yes.
example.
Yes.
And then I was like, if somebody else told me that story, I'd be like, yes, you did.
Yes,
Of course,
girl.
that's
Yeah.
what you did. Why is it different when it's yourself? And so it was just very interesting. And was that the first time I turned on Miss Rachel for her? Absolutely not. Will it be
Right.
the last? No.
No.
So
And what a good example of showing we give others so much grace and support, but we're so hard on ourselves, right? Because you're telling the story and I'm thinking, way to go. You were able to address the crisis in the moment, keep the other one entertained. And here you are thinking like, oh, that was a weakness.
Yeah, and giving space for the feel to be the feel.
Yes.
I hear you saying
Yes.
feels are not necessarily facts.
Mhm.
It's okay to have the feel. So if you
Mhm.
find yourself saying something like that to you, that is part of the experience.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
have grace for the feel, don't judge it.
Right.
You mentioned a few minutes ago barriers.
Mhm.
And one barrier might be even the lack of discussion in a medical space around assessing for depression or anxiety. But could you tell us a little bit about what barriers people might be experiencing in either accessing or talking about perinatal mental health?
Yeah, I think there's certainly the logistical barriers of when am I going to go? if I am home with my child?
Mhm.
And what if they're not the baby who just sleeps all day, right,
Right.
as a newborn? There can be that piece. And then also we might want to use insurance for therapy, and we also might have a deductible, and we might not be able to pay $150 a session. So
Yeah,
like
literally
Right.
time and cost.
yeah, absolutely.
For somebody who might be off of work at this time
Mhm,
and
Right.
potentially on paid time.
mhm.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. COVID has obviously changed a lot of things in terms of telehealth. And so it has been nice to work with moms all across Minnesota now, because we can do that via telehealth. So that has certainly helped. And yet, if I also know there's a lot of people who aren't seeking care because they don't want to tell their family.
Mhm.
Or culturally, their family does not believe
Right.
in mental health. And so I can't even count how many times I've met with people in their car or in a closet
Really?
because, over video, right?
Yeah.
Because they're like needing to kind of keep those things separate. And it's just, yeah, it's hard.
How brave of them
Mhm.
to still say, right, it's not accepted by the people around me, but yet I know I still need it. Therefore, I'm going to take the steps necessary.
You bring up something that's super interesting to me, that I do think there is this societal vibe around you're supposed to only be super excited and very joyful
Mhm.
about the experience. And that would come across as just looking forward to everything,
Mhm.
that uh, be able to embrace all of the things, maybe even be that parent that we see on commercials who it just responds with always loving and always just very regulated.
Right.
That you're talking about this perception of criticality from other people, that you even need something, or that you are struggling,
Mhm.
and that being a very powerful barrier, that emotional barrier of what are people going to think about this if they know.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It's supposed to be hard anyway, and so why would I be complaining? Like it's never been a secret that becoming a parent is hard. So what would make me deserving of more support than anybody else is what I often
Mm.
hear. It's what I hear from my own grandmother. I love talking to her about her postpartum experience because she's like, "Oh, I don't remember those 15 years." And it's like, "Well, yeah, probably not, because you kind
Yeah.
of had to put your head down and just
Wow.
go. And she's like, now I would be talking more about it, and maybe I would remember more.
Oh,
Interesting that we even
Mhm.
just kind of block it out.
Mhm.
yeah. So, can you share with us, what does treatment for maternal mental health look like? So, as far as if we have listeners out there, what could they expect as potential clients seeking out care, and how would they go about it?
Yeah. So a lot of people will start with their OB and kind of,
Okay.
hey, I'm having some symptoms. Hopefully they're getting screened for depression and anxiety, but maybe not. But hopefully, if they're able to have that conversation with their doctor, I would love if they got just handed some places
Mm-hmm.
to look for perinatal mental health,
Hmm.
or at least encouraged to seek care. And there are a couple different websites. There's like the Postpartum Support International website that's
Okay.
got like a directory of support groups and things like that are all free online. But then there's also PP Support MN. I don't remember if it's .com or .org, but .org in Minnesota that's got a directory of providers
Okay.
that are specifically trained. But I think in
Cool.
like best case scenario would be getting paired up with some therapy. Totally fine if you're not into the medication thing. But if folks are really looking for some rapid relief, there's really good evidence around combining those. So it's definitely possible. I would just recommend getting somebody who does have like a background in perinatal,
Okay.
just because some of the diagnoses and treatments look different than maybe general population.
For sure. Well, and I think you bring up such an important part of where you said, hopefully they're being assessed, right? But if they haven't done one, ask, right?
Yeah.
As a patient, you can ask your doctor, to complete an assessment. It's okay to ask for what you need.
Hmm. Yeah. What
Yeah,
kinds of
that's
things
great
would somebody
advice.
notice? You mentioned intensity, onset.
Duration.
Yeah. What kinds of things would somebody notice in themselves or maybe in their partner that would demonstrate therapy could be helpful?
I think it's one thing to feel down, as we have those kind of rises and falls during the postpartum period. But I think it's another thing to just not be able to function. Like,
Okay.
are we not able to take care of ourselves?
Okay.
Are we not able to take care of our baby? Are we completely numb? Are we realizing, like, gosh, I don't know that I've had any emotions on either side? Like, what does that look like? Am I, granted, do I get to craft as much as I used to pre-kids? Of course not.
Right.
But like, if I had like debilitating depression to where nothing sounded interesting versus now I'm like, oh, I would totally craft if I had time,
Yes.
or like a house project,
Yep.
things like that. It's like, of course we're not going to be doing all that stuff, but like, are you doing anything? Are you,
Well, like you said, barely functioning.
yeah, barely functioning. The sleep is a big one. Of course, you're not going to get to sleep all the time. You're not going to have a lot of the same opportunity, but are you able to when given the opportunity? And if you are awake and anxious, checking the monitor all night, even when your baby is sound asleep, like, absolutely, we should check in with somebody about that.
Okay.
Just because, I mean, of course, sleep is important, but also it can just be indicative of maybe some perinatal anxiety. Intrusive thoughts are another important thing. We all have intrusive thoughts.
Good point.
They can come and go. It's okay to be afraid of the intrusive thoughts. It's actually a good thing because it means they're not your reality.
The sense of right and
Of
wrong. Yep.
course. But if you feel like you can't escape them, or you feel like they're just kind of repeating more than what you can handle, absolutely get some help.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. And I love everything you just said, because how incredible that, people are going to hear you, right, on the radio and go, wow, I can relate to that. Or, wow, oh, and maybe think about, their own symptoms and their own experience. And for you just being able to be on the radio with, making them feel supported and not alone is so incredible. You're going to help so many people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for anyone listening, remember, you might be 1 in 5.
Yes.
So it is so common. It is so common. I want to give you a chance to talk about your business.
Oh,
you
sure.
own a business, so
What?
tell us what you do.
You have been supportive from the start, so thank you. Emerald Therapy is my business, and we were founded in 2022. Feels like yesterday, and yet it's been almost 3 years now.
Almost 3 years.
Yeah. We have an office in Eden Prairie and Richfield, and then we're also online across the state of Minnesota, varying specialties. Of course,
Okay.
a couple of us do perinatal mental health, but we also like to have some, folks that have different specialties and niches. A lot of us do accelerated resolution therapy. It's just my favorite modality.
Okay.
So,
And something you use with perinatal mental health?
For sure. Yeah, that comes up. Certainly not the gold standard for all mental health diagnoses, but there's some things that it can just work really well for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say
And
about
how
Emerald
can people
Therapy.
find you?
Oh, they can go to emeraldtherapyllc.com. That's, I think, how.
And then
And you, just to reiterate, you don't have to be a new mom
Right.
to find therapy with Emerald Therapy.
Oh,
It could
yeah.
just be a woman or a man who is seeking, just therapy for life issues.
Mhm.
Totally.
Okay.
And part of what you say, Tara, is an impact we didn't get to talk about today, but that perinatal mental health does impact partners.
Mhm.
And
1
there
in
is
10, apparently.
There is a
which is-
family system
Wow.
here that can also be impacted. So a recognition that it is a systems thing. In just the moments we have left, share a couple of things on if there are people listening who see themselves in this. What are strategies they could do to care for themselves right now?
Okay, so the obvious, answers would be eating. Please eat, but take that a step further. Why? If we're eating, say, protein, just let's say we're forgetting to eat as a
Mhm.
new parent. If we can just get a string cheese or a handful of nuts or something, we're at least going to give our brain the fuel to try to create some hormones that can stabilize, or some chemicals to stabilize our mood. And so it's just a little gift you can give yourself. seeing what you can do to move your body just to decrease some of our vulnerability to those emotions. But then do we have time for one of my favorite skills? It's just called breaking the day into 3 parts. It's basically like, have a really rough morning, and I still have a chance at having an okay afternoon, right? And just
That's
kind of
great,
breaking the
universal.
day. Yeah, because as a new mom, what are the chances that nothing's going to go wrong in your day?
Well said.
Right? So breaking it up, that's my favorite.
Well, break the day into 3 parts.
Love it. For everyone.
And for everybody.
Mhm.
Absolutely everybody. Amazing discussion. We're going to head to a commercial break. Tons to think about here. But when we come back, we're going to talk through listener questions about all things perinatal mental health. Feels Out Loud will process your thoughts in just a moment. We'll be right back.
You gotta find your people, then you'll find yourself. You gotta find your people. Nothing to lose. In a world full of strangers, you don't know who to trust. All you see is danger, trying to find what you lost.
We are back again with Feels Out Loud, and this is the part of the show where we talk through questions from our beautiful listeners. If you have a question related to mental wellness, sharing feelings, or our topics for each week that you would like us to process, please visit our website at becomingtogethermn.com and find the Feels Out Loud page to submit a question directly, or email us at contact@becomingtogethermn.com. We truly want to hear from you and what you are wondering about.
This has been a topic that we've had a lot of feedback questions about.
Yeah, we have a lot of mamas out there.
I absolutely love, because it means we're starting the discussion.
Mhm.
And it means that people are talking about something that hasn't been talked about. Super grateful to the people who have submitted thoughts about this week. Macey, we have a question from a person who said, I'm realizing that being a new mom feels isolating. What can I do to respond to this feeling? And what would you say?
Yeah. I think deciding, is this a feeling that I need to sit with and then take action? Is this a feeling I need to share with others? Maybe all of the above? Because I don't want to just say, oh, go join a support group. That might not be feasible. Is there somebody that we can start by verbalizing, hey, I'm feeling really isolated? Is there something that can happen even in the circles that we've already created? Versus, okay, let's go join a mom group. I think those things are absolutely fantastic, and I would love that. And I also know that's not going to be realistic for everybody. And so figuring out, like, how did I connect with people before baby?
Well, I love your thought process there, because it's so much of what Tara and I say every week on the show. When you find an emotion, sit with it for a minute. Pause. We don't have to immediately leap to action. Let's think about how is the emotion impacting me? Let me take stock of something and honor the feel by really being intentional about processing it. And then I hear you saying, share it. Share it with someone who you're connected to. That leads to the second question that we have from another listener. This person says, I'm so excited and happy to be a new mom, but I also seem to be swinging between guilt, huge anxiety, and feeling numb about parenting. What should I do?
Gosh, if I could only talk to them and ask them more questions. But no, I think what comes to mind is allowing yourself to, so sitting with those things, looking into what is some evidence that might be contributing to these things. We might find that there's not maybe a lot. They are just feelings. And so figuring out, does it make sense to just bounce these things off of somebody? And does it make sense to bounce them off of a therapist who can help with actual, skills to improve the symptoms? Or does it help to bounce them off of a friend who maybe you just need some validation or to hear you? But it can definitely be that roller coaster that so many people write off of. Well, this is how it's supposed to be. And I would say definitely don't be afraid to reach out and share that, even with a therapist, and just see what they say.
Well, and it sounds like for both of our listeners who sent questions, that feeling of isolated, that feeling of having guilt, huge anxiety, and feeling numb seems pretty common as far as they're not alone Would you agree with that?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, but those aren't the things we're sharing on Instagram.
Right.
You know, we're sharing our
No.
matching outfits. We're not sharing how
Or the cute
Yes.
nursery.
exactly.
Yes.
We're not sharing how we cried ourselves to sleep because we haven't talked to any of our friends in weeks. And so there is just comfort in either sitting with people who understand or just knowing. And unfortunately, I think addressing the grief over the life before. And even though this is something that you wanted and worked for, it is absolutely still okay to be grieving all the things that look different now.
Right.
Well said.
Girl.
It's amazing. We are at the end of our show already for today. Thank you for listening this morning, and thank you for joining us, Macey. Join us next week as we explore mom shaming and the mental health impact of judging one another in this arena of life. And in the week ahead, everyone, be kind to yourself. Remember that connection fosters wellness, and your voice is one that the world around you needs to hear. Share yourselves, friends.
Some will, some won't. I wanna feel just a little, just a little.